The Copper Scroll, the treasure map from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Nobody has ever found, among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in desert caves, one was completely different from all the others. It wasn't scripture. It wasn't a religious text at all. It was a list engraved onto sheets of copper, describing the specific locations of an enormous buried treasure, gold, silver, and sacred temple items hidden across dozens of separate sites. Nearly 70 years later, not a single one of those locations has ever been definitively confirmed found. Among the extensive collection of ancient manuscripts collectively known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in a series of caves near Qumran in the Judean desert beginning in 1947, one specific scroll, discovered in 1952 and subsequently designated the Copper Scroll, proved genuinely immediately distinct from every other document within the broader collection. Since while the overwhelming majority of the Dead Sea Scrolls consisted of religious, legal, and community texts written on considerably more conventional parchment or papyrus material, the Copper Scroll was engraved directly onto sheets of actual copper, a genuinely unusual choice of writing material that itself suggested the document's specific content held some form of unusual, sustained practical importance to whoever had originally created it. The scroll's actual content proved genuinely, remarkably distinct from the broader Dead Sea Scrolls collection as well, since rather than containing religious or scriptural material comparable to the collection's other documents, the Copper Scroll instead consisted of a detailed list describing 64 separate locations, each entry providing specific geographic descriptions and directions intended to identify the location of substantial quantities of buried gold, silver, and various valuable ritual and temple-related items described in specific, sometimes genuinely enormous quantities that, if the scroll's descriptions were taken as fully, literally accurate, would represent a treasure of genuinely extraordinary total value. The scroll's specific physical condition presented genuine, immediate practical challenges to the researchers who initially recovered it, since the copper material had become severely oxidized and brittle across the centuries since its original creation, making the scroll far too fragile to safely unroll and directly read. Using conventional manuscript examination techniques, requiring researchers to develop a specialized cutting technique, carefully sectioning the brittle copper into narrow strips that could be individually examined and translated without causing the entire fragile document to crumble entirely during the examination process itself. Once successfully translated following this careful physical examination process, the scroll's specific content generated genuinely significant sustained scholarly debate regarding its actual underlying nature and historical accuracy. Since the described treasure's sheer total scale, based on the specific quantities described across the scroll's 64 separate location entries, would represent a quantity of precious metal considerably exceeding what most historians studying the period consider plausible, for the specific Jewish community generally believed responsible for creating the broader Dead Sea Scrolls collection to have actually possessed. This specific discrepancy between the treasure's described scale and the apparent economic circumstances of the broader Qumran community has led some researchers studying the scroll to propose the document may actually describe treasure connected to the Second Jewish Temple in Jerusalem itself, potentially representing an attempt to document and preserve knowledge of valuable temple properties specifically hidden away for safekeeping during the genuinely severe political and military instability surrounding the Jewish revolt against Roman rule and the temple's eventual destruction in 70 AD, a theory that would help explain the treasure's considerable described scale, though this specific theory remains genuinely unconfirmed rather than definitively established. What has made the Copper Scroll's specific treasure genuinely persistently impossible to definitively locate in the decades since its translation is the scroll's own specific descriptive method, since the location descriptions rely on geographic and structural landmarks, specific wells, tombs, and structural features that would have been genuinely familiar and easily identifiable to whoever originally created the document roughly 2,000 years ago, but that have, in the intervening centuries, either been lost entirely to time, buried beneath centuries of subsequent construction and geological change, or become genuinely impossible to definitively match to any specific modern location given the ancient landmark's own considerable subsequent transformation or disappearance. Numerous formal and informal search efforts have been conducted at various sites throughout Israel and the broader region, specifically attempting to locate treasure matching the scroll's described locations in the decades since its translation, efforts that have, to date, failed to produce any confirmed, definitively verified discovery of treasure directly matching the scroll's specific descriptions, though this sustained lack of confirmed discovery hasn't definitively resolved whether the described treasure was ever actually successfully hidden. As described, was discovered and removed sometime in the intervening 2,000 years without any surviving historical record of that recovery, or whether the scroll's specific descriptions were never actually intended as a literal, practical treasure map in the first place. What makes the Copper Scroll endure as one of history's most significant unresolved archaeological documents isn't simply the genuine mystery surrounding its described treasure's actual current location or historical accuracy, considerable as that specific unresolved question genuinely remains, but the document's fundamentally unique nature within the broader Dead Sea Scrolls collection itself, a single practical material list standing in genuine striking contrast to an otherwise overwhelmingly religious and scriptural collection, raising questions about its actual original purpose and creator that remain genuinely unresolved alongside the treasure's own physical location. If stories like this, where an actual ancient treasure map has been sitting translated and available for decades, and still nobody has definitively found a single thing it describes, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.